So it's actually really interesting, really interesting to be able to ask you these questions as your son. That's I've got my own career in music and all this kind of fun stuff, and it's just kind of nice to reconnect and do this. So I guess we'll just dive right into some questions right off the bat. So could you just tell us how you got started in music? Like go all the way back to the beginning and
The
describe
very
like
beginning.
yeah, right where well, a lot of our audience is going to be, somewhat close to that at this point.
Okay. Well, I had a cousin, older cousin, who played cornet in the band, decided that football was more important in his life than playing a musical instrument. And I'd always shown an aptitude towards music. I sang in the choir in elementary school, and I was in theater, a couple of shows in junior high. So I decided that I would take the cornet. It was offered to me. It was free. We didn't have to buy an instrument. And I spent my first year learning how to play the cornet in the sixth grade. And don't remember who my band director was. It was so long ago. And but I had a great time. And I said, "This is fun. This is what I want to do." At least I thought so at the time, that that's what I wanted to do for the rest of the high school. So I went to the seventh grade, and then we moved to Alabama and Butler, Alabama, and I stayed in music and eventually played in high school here in San Antonio at John Jay High School. Well, I went to South San first and studied with Al Sturcio, who's a big name in Texas. We kind of call him the godfather of band music here in Texas. And then later on at John Jay High School, I studied with Dan Schreiber. He was my band director. He's passed on. And but all through that, I played trumpet. And it wasn't until I got to my junior year I started telling kids, "Why don't you play this part and you play this?" And I'd play it on my trumpet, and then I'd have the kids all play, and we were playing things off the top of our heads, "Mercy, Mercy, Mercy," and I was listening to jazz. Now I grew up uh, with my mother, who was very big into albums. We had Kind of Blue, we had Tchaikovsky, we had John Coltrane, we had all these big albums. You remember those big things, back then, and they great influence on me because I heard all this going on. And then Latin music. I lived in San Antonio, um, playing cumbias and polkas and kind of a mixture of all kinds of things. So it was kind of a eclectic childhood in terms of music.
Hmm. So, moving forward after the high school, you pretty much like it sounds to me like you described you wanted to be in music at an earlier age than a lot of people. A lot of us don't have that decision making process until like later on in high school, if not even like towards college or something like that. Like our senior year is like, oh wait, I better figure out something to do. I guess I'm going to keep doing music, right? Um, but how did you transition from being a trumpet player in high school into a professional trumpet player?
Well, I started playing gigs when I was about, oh, I don't know, 10th grade, ninth grade. Yeah, 10th grade. I started playing gigs with an all African American group, soul groups, playing trumpet.
Mm.
You couldn't play trumpet in a rock band back then. There's Beatles and the Kinks and Rolling Stones, and they didn't have trumpet, so you didn't get to play in those groups. So, but I could play in a soul group, and most of the time I was the only white guy in the group. And but what a great influence, rhythm and blues, and
Mm.
a lot of the guys played jazz, and we played some Gershwin like Summertime. Uh, so I guess about my 10th grade year at South San Antonio High School in here in San Antonio, I started playing trumpets in rock groups and soul groups, and that was my first jump into that.
Mm.
I always knew that I wanted to play trumpet. I was pretty naive about where I needed to go, in terms of being a professional trumpet player. I never thought of it like that. It was just kind of fun to do. And
Mm.
it really wasn't until I got to college that I got real serious about becoming a professional musician.
So I've heard the story, but I think it'd be really interesting for the younger students to hear. Can you tell us about your first jam session? with Bob Rutledge and all those guys, because we have a bunch of young jazzers here that may or may not have had an experience at an actual jam session with older musicians.
Yeah, I had this idea that I wanted to be a jazz musician. So I was dating your mother at the time, and we went to this nightclub, and I was 18, and she was 19, and I had the trumpet in the back of my car. And anyway, Jimmy Merriman was playing drums, great jazz drummer who's passed on, and playing with Bob Rutledge, and I can't remember the piano player's name. But anyway, we were sitting at the table out there, and I said, wow, I'd sure love to sit in with this group. So I went backstage, saw Jimmy, and said, hey, man, can I sit in with the group? He said, let me ask Bob. And Bob said, yeah, cool, you know. So I went out, got my trumpet, came back inside. And the next set, I got up on the stage, and Bob says, what do you want to play? And I said, I don't know. How about Walk On By? That was a big Dionne Warwick hit at the time, Burt Bacharach. And I said, he said, yeah, sure. What key do you want to do it in? I said, any key, whatever key you want to do it in. Well, that's pretty dumb thing to answer, but Bob was pretty cool. He said, well, I'll tell you what, let's do it in the original key. How's that? Which is, I think it's in B minor or E minor, I forget. And so we played it, and I'm getting through there, and I'm playing the melody along with the combo. And Bob stops the combo on the stage in front of the people, in front of my girlfriend, by the way, who eventually became my wife. And I said, what's up? And he goes, man, you don't know the melody. I said, well, that's what I heard on the, that's what I've been playing. He said, no, man, you don't know the melody and you don't know the chords. Get off the stage. And when you can figure out what the melody and the chords, you can come sit back in. All right. Well, I slunked off the stage, but I was pretty bummed out about it. And so the next day in the morning, I got up and I went over, I found out where Bob Rutledge was living, and I knocked on his door, and I said, he answered the door, and he was in his robe, and he says, what do you want? It's early. I said, I want to talk to you about what happened last night. He just gave me this look. He says, come on inside. So I came on inside, and I said, what did I do wrong? He says, look over on the piano. And I looked over at the piano, and there were stacks of sheet music.
Yeah.
Stacks of sheet music on top piano. He says, when you can play this music with the correct melody and understanding of the chords, you can sit in. But until that time, you really shouldn't be sitting in with people until you know what you're doing. Now, there's a certain amount of that you got to take with a grain of salt. He's a pro, and I was a kid. But my suggestion to anyone, before you sit in with any group, and I think you should sit in, you should learn 2 or 3 tunes that you know, and then go sit in.
Right.
And ask them and call out the tunes. But don't just sit in because you want to noodle in the background. That doesn't do anything. The professionals just get irritated with you, so don't do that.
Yeah, I always tell my students, it's like, have an idea of at least 3 or 4 tunes that you can you have ready to play at any given time,
right?
And and let the professionals know that these are the tunes that you know how to play. And if you don't know any of the tunes that they're playing, then you need to be sitting down in the audience and listening, and even better, writing down the title of the tunes that you don't know, so that you could take that back to the woodshed for the next, to have those ready for next week when you show up to the jam session. You're like, hey, I learned those, learn those tunes. I think you told me to do that. San Antonio was great because it was a very what's the word I'm looking for? It was a very nurturing atmosphere, especially with the late Kyle Keener and Polly Harrison and the Small World crew and all that. Now, I was wondering if you could tell us about your experience, joining the Army and the military experience, and how that, just kind of like maybe give us a trail a little bit towards how you became the director of, the Army's premier touring jazz band, the Jazz Ambassadors.
Well, I joined the Army in 71, went active duty January 5th, 72. And of course, after basic training, at the time we had to go to Armed Forces School of Music. It was a 6-month-long course. But while I was there, excuse me, their oldest brother was born, by the way. While I was there at the School of Music, there's this group called the Studio Band, who eventually became the Jazz Ambassadors, who showed up, and they played a concert for all the the basic students, and the Navy, the Marine Corps is also there. And and it was an evening performance. So I talked to your mother was with me, and I said, one of these days, I want to be in that group, says the 19-year-old. Anyway, so I went out like most, Army bandsmen and playing trumpet with the 5th Army Band in San Antonio. Joined the band here. And after about three years, I went to North Texas for about 6 months and realized that I really liked the Army because you could write anything and they played it the next day. So it's kind of like having a lap band all the time, which wasn't the case when you're majoring in composition at North Texas in 1975. All they wanted was serial music, and I wasn't pretty much into that. Even the jazz band stuff was, they had 10 jazz bands. You get kind of lost in the whole process. Mm-hmm. So I went back in the Army, and a few months later, the Army Field Band in Washington, D.C. came through town. Make a long story short, I went backstage. They asked me to audition. They heard about me because I'd been writing a lot by that time. Dave Wolpe was retiring, and they needed somebody to take his place. So I flew up there and passed the audition. Actually, Dave Wolpe is the one who auditioned me, and he took me to the major and says, "You need to hire this guy." And the rest is history. Rest is history. Dave still is a great guy. And Dave at the time was actually not only a staff arranger for the field band, but he was the director of the studio band. By that time, I think they were the Jazz Ambassadors. So went up there, was an arranger for 9 months, wrote a bunch of music. But about July or August of that year, I got to thinking, they got an opening. They're going to have a bunch of openings for warrant officer bandmaster. And I had what the heck, throw my shirt into the pile and see what happens. So I auditioned and got into the warrant officer bandmaster course. So I only spent like 9 months at the field band the first time. And then went to the School of Music, back to the old School of Music, took the warrant officer course. It's a 6-month course. We started with 20. We ended up with 10 people. And I was lucky enough to be one of those. My first assignment was 5th Infantry Division Band in Fort Polk, Louisiana. And then from there I went to, and that's where you were born. And your sister Colleen. And then from there we went to 3rd Armored Division in Frankfurt, Germany. Wonderful 3 years. It was a lot of fun. A lot of wine tasting and, well, anyway, it was a lot of fun.
High school kids, Pop. High school kids.
I don't. You may want to cut that out. So anyway, left there after 3 years and went to the Army Band in New York City. They gave me a choice, though. They gave me Fort Riley, Kansas, or New York City. Well, that wasn't much of a choice. I ended up in New York City, and I don't mean that derogatory towards the 1st Infantry Division. They have a great band, and they have a great place to live. Kansas is actually pretty nice. And so I did 3 years in New York City, played for Mayor Koch and all the biggies. Mitterrand came, the Chinese premier, the president came, played for Reagan. We did the centennial of the Statue of Liberty. And about that time, I was ended up my 3 years in New York, and I wanted to get you guys out of New York City. So in school, so I put in for 3rd Armored Division again to go back to Germany because it was such a fun place to be. And instead, I got a phone call one Sunday evening, and it was the executive officer of the Army Field Band, Frank Doobie, and he says, Paul Cheriverly's retiring, and we'd like you to come be the director of the Jazz Ambassadors. Because I had made it quite well known that that's the job that I always wanted from the get-go, once I heard it as a basic student. So I returned to Washington, Fort Meade, Maryland, actually. That's where they're stationed. And 3 or 4 weeks later, I was on a 40-day tour across the United States.
Jeez.
I left you guys.
Right. Hey, tell us about your very first rehearsal with the JAs.
Oh, that was a great experience. I mean, this is a dream come true. Here's a young 34-year-old bandmaster who'd been out in the field for 9 years. We came to Washington to be the director of the Jazz Ambassadors. So
right, you're Mr. Army at this point, right?
I'm still kind of, Army. And so, but I've always wrote music. Every band that I was in, I did all the shows. I did shows, arrangements, uh, even played a little trumpet. But they didn't really want me to do that, but I was a writer anyway. So I would write the music for all the shows. We did show after show after show. And then, so getting back to the Jazz Ambassadors was just a dream come true. So I picked the hardest piece of music I could find for the Jazz Ambassadors. My first tune to count them off in my life. And it's like, 1, 2, 2, 2, you know, and you know, and I've got the score in my hand, and I'm going, and I'm thinking to myself, there is absolutely nothing for me to say when this is over with. So I cut off the band when, you know, big chord at the end. The band, I cut them off. And I look at the band, and they're all looking at me like, what's he going to say? Now, I've got to remember, a lot of these guys know me because they knew me when I was a staff arranger 9 years. And so they all looked at me, and I looked at them, and I said, oh, that was sure nice. Get out the next piece. And the next piece. It was pretty much that the whole way, all morning. I was so in awe of them. You know, later on, we talked about how we're going to present a piece. And you never, with the Jazz Ambassadors, you never had to talk about notes or phrasing or anything. You might talk about, could you swing a little harder here, saxes? Could you give me kind of a Marshall Royal sound saxophone section when we get to the letter C? And those kind of things. And John, you've got the solo. Jim, you got the second solo. We'll open up this section here. You know, and then you ran through the piece. And by the way, every time I told them to do something, and I never, you know, directing them to do stuff, they had a pencil in their hair or they had it on a stand. And I would say, you got the solo. They write, the whole band, not just the guy with the solo, the whole band writes who's got the solo. You know, when I say something like, I want you to do this here, let's go back and go do letters B again, or we're going to open up this section. They're all writing the whole time I'm talking. That's what professionals do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's what I was going to get to. Like, what level of musicianship does an ensemble like that look for? Like, what we've talked about this a lot of times. Like, what does it take to get into one of like the premier military bands, or even like any like, you know, top flight professional ensemble? Like, what does it actually take? Because I get this question a lot from my students. Like, do you think I can go up for this gig? Or do you think I could audition for this gig? And, you know, I want to be nice, but sometimes I just say, hey, dude, no. I know what it takes to get into that band.
So. Yeah, and that's a perfect, you know, we've had that conversation. And while I was director of the director of bands at the University of Arkansas Fort Smith later on, after I left the Army, I had a student come to me and say, there's an opening in the concert band at the Army Field Band, and I would like you to write me a letter of recommendation. And I said, I can't do that. He says, why not? I said, you're not ready. He said, what do you mean? You're a very good musician, and but you're not ready. Most of those people in those special bands have master's degrees in performance, are doctors. There's, you know, in the Army Field Band, there's at least 10 doctors of music. Mm-hmm. And so he said, well, why won't you? I said, because you're not ready. He says, well, when will I be ready? I said, when you can go and any piece of music that I pick out and put in front of you, you play it perfectly the first time. Mm-hmm. And he says, first time? And I said, yeah, because that's your competition. People that audition for these bands, they can play. It's not about, you know, how well they play. They all play. It's the sound, the articulation that you use. How would you fit in with the clarinet section if it's a clarinet opening? How would you fit in with the trumpet? Does your sound fit in? Maybe there's something about the way you play a particular concerto that they've chosen for you to learn and that you play for them. And they look at all those kind of things. But they all play. They all sight read.
Other bands. Yeah. Yeah, there are other bands too. I know I was in a fleet band. I wasn't in a special band, and
Well,
it's not like they'll take anybody these days. Even a lot of those people have master's degrees in music and such because what a great gig. Oh darn, I have to play music every day, all day long. You know,
it
maybe I
is
have
a
to
great
stay.
thing.
I
And
do
it,
kind of have to stay in shape and make sure my uniform looks good,
right.
but
Well, you know, the options for a young musician coming out of high school, you can get in a military band. There's National Guard bands, there's
mhm,
reserve bands. They're not at the top tier. The special bands in Washington D.C. or West Point or the Academy Band. So I encourage young high schoolers or people in college to join one of these line. We call them line bands. You call them bands in the field, and because it's a great experience and you do have a lot of time to practice and you have a lot of time to you're going to play in a woodwind ensemble or a brass ensemble or a percussion ensemble. You're going to go out and perform as a rock group. You're going to go out and perform as a woodwind ensemble, or you might go out and perform as a big band, jazz band, and or a concert band, which a lot of times when I was a bandmaster out in the field, and most of my soldier musicians were between the ages of 19 and 25,
mhm.
you know. But you get into a special band in Washington, D.C., which is a whole different level. You do one rehearsal, you go out and do the gig. That's it.
Yeah.
And on a line band, though, you have weeks to rehearse, or you have a set program that you can put together. You have a patriotic matinee, or you have a patriotic what we call a pre-music for a ceremony that we pick out
Mhm.
before, and we hardly ever run it down. It's the same music, and we just go out and perform it.
Do you have any advice for younger musicians, like what they should do if they decide they want to go professional, they want to pursue this as a career moving forward?
Go to college, go to a school of music such as yours, or for instance, um, but make sure you go
Appalachian
to some.
State, right here. So.
Yeah, yeah. Well, or figure out who you want to study with.
Hmm.
Go and visit several universities. You may want to start off at a junior college. There's some very fine junior college music programs,
Hmm.
and there's nothing wrong with that. And it's a lot cheaper. I started off at San Antonio College, and then went to St. Mary's University, and then went to a bunch of other ones while I was in the Army. But I think college is important. It teaches you discipline. It teaches you the art. It gives you a well-rounded basis in theory and sightseeing ear training. I think all that's important. And these days, the competition is so stiff that without a bachelor's and in some cases a master's degree, it can be very difficult to get into these kind of organizations that you want to. Now, having said all that, if you're a all-stater and that's what you think that you've got the ability to go out and do it, give it a shot. And by the way, it doesn't nobody minds you giving it a shot. Even if you
Hmm.
don't pass the audition, you should go ahead and take it. And, without don't have the fear. Get over the fear of making that mistake. Just go and audition, and they will tell you what you need to do. I never had a problem telling any of the youngsters that came in an audition. I would audition kids in their senior in high school, and I would just tell them, great job. You're not ready. You need to go a couple of years of college, or you need to go ahead and get your bachelor's, or go study with someone. Um, if you're serious about being a professional musician, get serious.
Hmm.
Get serious. Find the teacher that you want. My teachers were the big reason I'm doing what I'm doing right now. I'm composing and arranging for several different publishers. After I got out of the Army, I went back to college and taught public school for a short time, and then went to teaching university level, and never looked back. I love it. I still love it. I retired, but I'm teaching part-time at St. Mary's University right now, teaching composition and arranging and orchestration. Um, and writing a lot of music. So,
Right. I mean, if it's something that you want to do, you will find ways to do it. And if you don't find ways to do it, then do you really want to do it? You know,
yes, yeah.
it's one of
I,
those things.
if you want it, you'll do it. If you don't do it, then obviously you weren't that passionate about it. And listen to your teachers.
Hmm.
What I don't understand sometimes is I've got all this experience. I've got over 100 pieces published. I've done all these things. And I'll say something to one of my students, and they look at me like, I don't agree with you. And I'm kind of like, you haven't done anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
How could you even say that, you know? But I don't say that. I just say, well, you know, you should try this and go for this. And that.
Yeah, my favorite is when they show up at the lesson the next week and go, and they sound great, and I'm like, well, you sound wonderful. What did you do? I finally did what you told me I needed to do. Like, oh, funny how that works, isn't it?
It is. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, practice, practice, practice.
Yeah, that
Being
should never be a question.
yeah, being a musician is a lonely job. It is a lonely job. We spend most of our life in a practice room, or in my case, my studio, writing, composing, playing, practicing, 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 and listening to so much material. And then we go out and we spend, you know, we go play an hour gig, and you know, and all that that we did, it was a preparation for that one moment when we have to perform in front of people. And I think it's so important to listening to new pieces of music, old pieces of music.
And I think, you know, this day and age for a young jazz musician, what a glorious time to be alive.
Yeah,
They have YouTube. You know?
we didn't have
I didn't have YouTube, but I mean, and you know, it dawned on me, you know, because jazz is one of the main things that I do, is that the entire breadth of the history of jazz has been recorded, pretty much.
Yes,
Everything.
100 years.
All 100 years of it. So if you can't find it, then you're not looking too hard, are you? You know,
it's all there. And what's great is there's great books out there now on jazz.
Yeah, there's a lot better books than there used to be. So
I love Shelley Berg's The Gold Note Method. I'm looking
Yeah.
up here at all my books that I have up here.
actually, I stole that one from you.
I know, but I got it back.
Oh,
Yeah, I remember I got it back this last time. You know, and great books on arranging. I mean, you got Inside the Score. You've got music arranging orchestration, and you've got sounds and scores by Mancini, and you've got The Complete Arranger by Sammy Nestico. All of it is just waiting for you. If you want to be a writer, it's there. But here's the key to writing. You write every day. Every day you write. Now, maybe you just do it up here, but you write. You think about it. You listen. If you want to write a woodwind quartet, listen to woodwind quartets. You want to write a symphony, listen to symphonies. And if you're a young composer, I wouldn't write a symphony first. I would try to write woodwind music and brass music and percussion ensemble music, and then mixed ensembles is so important. Learn about the instruments. Learn what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, and I'll say, as a you know, from the jazz side of the house, if you want to write jazz music, you have to listen to a whole lot of jazz music.
But it sounds so. You make it sound so simple, son.
Well, you know, I mean, I teach jazz improvisation, and I literally tell my students on the first day of every semester of the first semester of our jazz improv sequence, I say, okay, guys, well, thank you for signing up for this class. It's great to see you. I'm going to teach you how to improvise. Here's how you learn how to improvise in jazz. You find a recording of your favorite person on, maybe on your instrument, maybe not, and you play that recording over and over and over and over and over again, and you play along with that recording until what you're playing sounds exactly like that recording. Thank you very much. I'll see you guys next semester in Jazz Improv 2. In other words, you know, what's the line? Good composers borrow, great composers steal. Like, learning how to improvise in jazz is exactly like that. I tell my students all the time, this is the only class where you copy everybody's homework.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, when I was with the JAs and on the bus, the guys are here's these great musicians, and they got headphones on and they're listening to music. We had different, you know, we had CD players back then, and they're writing down what they hear. They're writing it down.
Yeah.
And on the bus, 200 miles, they're listening to this, they're listening to that, and then they're writing this down. And then when they get into their room, what do they do for 4 hours in the afternoon? They practice those licks, those figures. That's what they do.
And they take it through the keys too, I bet.
And they take it through the keys, learn it in the original key, and then learn it up a half step, and then learn it down a half step. He says, because you run into these people called vocalists. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah, actually, getting with a vocalist is probably one of the best things you can do as a at least at the beginning of your career, because then you really figure out, oh, that lick that I learned, I really need to know that in D flat now.
That's true. I tell you, when you're playing a blues band, you'll find that out real quick.
Yeah.
I played trumpet with the Chris Cameron band about 10 years ago. For about 4 or 5 years I played with them, and they did everything in E and B, and
Hmm.
they would tell me, Chuck, take a solo, and I'm going, oh, okay.
I don't like this key.
Yeah,
Yeah.
E puts me in F sharp
Tone is always
major.
good. Do you have any more advice for these young jazz musicians? That's who we're talking to, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say that the most important thing uh, about being any kind of a musician is learning your instrument. Learn your instrument, how it works. I'm not talking about pushing buttons, but learning your instrument, practicing. And one of the best ways to do this, I'll repeat what Jeff Jarvis says. He says, everything I learned about jazz was found in the Arbenz book.
Hmm.
Because if you can conquer your instrument as a classical musician, makes jazz a lot easier to approach. Because what happens in classical music, you're taught how to play your instrument. And get together with your buddies.
Oh man, absolutely.
Put your own little group together, and you just listen and copy, listen and copy, and then
Copy everything.
eventually what happens is that it becomes assimilated inside of you, and
Right.
it comes out in a different way. It comes out your way, but
Right.
first you have to learn the other's ways.
Well, that was the Clark Terry principle, right? Imitation, assimilation, and
Great
innovation.
trumpet player, yeah.
Yeah. So you have to learn that you have to imitate a long time. I love these young players that I see at jam sessions from time to time. They're like, "Well, I'm just going to try to do my thing, man. I'm just doing my thing." Like, well, A, who are you? And B, your thing, nobody else knows how to speak your language because we all speak jazz here, and the jazz that we speak has been influenced and solidified by years and years and years of study of great jazz masters. So your thing, that sounds cool, man, but I'm not in your head.
Well, I think it's important that these young jazz musicians in the all region bands in Arkansas um, have an opportunity to talk to someone like you, because you are closer to that beginning than I am. I'm at
Mm,
the end. You're at the beginning, and but I realize that you're probably in the middle at this point,
I
and
would say middle.
yeah, but you're closer to the beginning than I am. And I think what's important for them is to be inspired by us by saying how what a wonderful a life of music that I have had and what you've had by being both a classical and a jazz musician.
Mhm.
Do not pigeonhole yourself into one area of music. There is no such thing as a bass player or a trumpet player. You are a total musician. You must write, you must
Mhm.
arrange, you must play, you must conduct,